The gravel crunched differently beneath my tires as I drove along Maple Ridge Road. Something felt off. As I rounded the last bend, the site of my family's farm came into view, but it was no longer ours. A large concrete hotel had taken the place of our golden wheat fields, its windows gleaming like 1,000 watchful eyes. I pulled over, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The farm I had known my whole life had disappeared, replaced by this imposing structure with its manicured lawns and expansive parking lot. Bright yellow construction barriers lined the property, and workers in hard hats moved around like busy ants. How could this happen? I had only been gone for a month, attending a consulting job in Singapore that my family needed. Sarah and I had thought we had everything secured before I left. The farm had been in my family for 4 generations, each acre cherished and carefully tended. A construction worker noticed me and approached, clipboard in hand. "Can I help you?" he asked, glancing at me with a mix of confusion and concern. I stepped out of the car, feeling as if my legs might give way beneath me. "This is my family's land," I replied, maintaining a calm but firm tone. "I'm Richard Holloway." The worker shifted uncomfortably. "Oh, you're the owner," he said, sounding hesitant. Before I could say anything else, my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah read, "Richard, emergency. Call me ASAP." But my eyes were locked on the hotel, looming over what used to be our farmland. As I walked closer, boots crunching over soil that had once been fertile, each step felt like an intrusion. This hotel wasn't just a new building. It was a bold statement, an assertion that someone believed they could take what wasn't theirs. Near the construction entrance, a large sign caught my eye. Willowbrook Community Development approved by HOA. Karen Reynolds' name stood out as the project director. My mind raced as I made connections. Karen was the HOA president who had always seen our farm as an inconvenience. She had complained about our unkempt boundaries and sent countless letters regarding grass height and fence issues. She had wanted our land for years, but this was more than I had ever imagined. On a nearby table, a stack of papers drew me closer. Construction permits, zoning documents, and approval stamps. Each sheet told a part of the unfolding story. I was eager to make sense of what I had found, and one document stood out in particular. A small note about community improvement zones caught my attention. Something about the wording felt off. It wasn't necessarily illegal, but it certainly seemed deliberate. A construction worker watching me nearby spoke up, "Sir, you can't be here." Despite his words, he didn't sound very convincing. I turned to him and smiled, though it didn't really reach my eyes. "I'll be leaving soon," I said. As I drove back into town, my mind raced with questions. How long had this plan been in place? What legal tactics had Karen employed? Most importantly, how could I prove that something was wrong here? I hadn't replied to Sarah's text, but I needed to collect information to grasp the situation while I had been away. This was not just about a piece of land. It was about justice and preserving our family's legacy. While driving, a billboard caught my eye. It read, "Willowbrook, growing together." The irony struck me. Growing together seemed to mean taking without consent. At a local coffee shop, I started jotting down notes, dates, observations, and questions. Each line I wrote was a step closer to untangling the complicated situation before me. The farm wasn't merely land. It represented our history and our future. The waitress came over with a fresh cup of coffee. "Rough day?" she asked. I looked up, forcing a determined smile. "Just getting started," I replied. Little did Karen know, I was gearing up for a fight, and I intended to approach it wisely. Later, I turned to an old file cabinet in my barn that held more secrets than I had anticipated. Sunlight beamed through the wooden slats, illuminating the dust as I pulled out a stack of yellowed documents. My grandfather had carefully preserved these papers. My fingers skimmed the edges of old property maps, each crease telling a bit of our family's history. As I spread the documents across the workbench and sorted through decades of paperwork, I realized most people would have tossed these away long ago, but something had always urged me to keep them. My grandfather was meticulous, always preparing for the unexpected. Now, those preparations might be my only lifeline. The first document I examined was a hand-drawn property map from 1952, with intricate pencil lines marking our farm's boundaries and notes scribbled in the margins. I recalled my grandfather's stories about his struggles to keep this land during tough times. "Knowledge is your best weapon," he would say, his weathered hands gesturing to these very documents. As I studied the papers, a pattern began to reveal itself. The homeowners had their own stories to tell. The association didn't form overnight. They had been gradually undermining individual property rights for years. I discovered old meeting minutes, letters, and legal notices that revealed more about Karen Reynolds and her long-term plans. One faded yellow envelope stood out to me. Inside, a series of letters outlined a property dispute from years ago. The homeowners association had tried a similar approach then, claiming that certain land was abandoned or underused for community projects. But someone had successfully pushed back, and those documents held the key to understanding how. I pulled out my phone and carefully photographed each page. My hands were steady, but my mind was racing. Every page could be a crucial part of this larger puzzle. I knew Sarah would help me make sense of this later. She had a talent for spotting connections that I often overlooked. The barn around me felt transformed. These weren't just dusty old papers anymore. They had become evidence, tools in a conflict I hadn't anticipated but was now resolved to pursue. Suddenly, a noise interrupted my thoughts. The crunch of gravel announced someone's arrival. I quickly gathered the documents, my heart racing. Through the barn's small window, I caught sight of a white SUV with HOA parking stickers pulling up near the property line. Karen Reynolds stepped out, her designer sunglasses glinting in the midday sun. She walked with the assuredness of someone who presumed she held dominion over everything in her sight. I remained quiet in the dim shadows, knowing she couldn't see me. As she pulled out a clipboard and began jotting down notes, it felt as if she was taking stock of my land. Her expensive heels sank slightly into the soft earth where my wheat had recently thrived. The nearby hotel construction loomed in the background, a massive concrete structure that clashed starkly with the rural scenery. At that moment, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my lawyer, Marcus. "Found something interesting. Call me ASAP." I realized I had to tread carefully. One misstep could give Karen the excuse she needed to label me an unreasonable property owner. From my grandfather, I learned that patience could be a strategy rather than a flaw. The research I conducted over the past few days had revealed more than just land boundaries. I had uncovered a network of relationships involving the HOA, local developers, and city council members. Each connection acted like a thread in a complex web of local politics and land development. Just as Karen finished her inspection, she drove off, oblivious to the layers of evidence I was piecing together. I stepped out of the barn, taking a moment to collect my thoughts. The land around me felt different now. It was no longer just a peaceful farm. It felt like a battlefield. My next move had to be strategic. I needed to dig deeper, to understand more. The documents I held were only the starting point. Within them lay the evidence I needed to counter Karen and the HOA's attempt to seize our land. As I glanced toward the hotel in the distance, I realized they believed they had won, but they were unaware of what I was preparing to reveal. Entering the community center felt like stepping into another arena. The fluorescent lights flickered above, casting long shadows across the room, filled with HOA board members and concerned residents. Karen Reynolds sat at the head of the long wooden table, confidently dressed in a tailored blazer and with her hair perfectly styled. She had always operated under the belief that rules were malleable, easily manipulated to suit her agenda. I recalled how she'd intimidated neighbors at previous meetings, her tone sugary but her intentions sharp. "I'd like to discuss the recent development on my family's farmland," I began, my voice steady. The room went quiet. You could feel the tension crackle in the air. I laid out the first set of documents, old property maps that had been lovingly preserved since my grandfather's time. Each one was meticulously notarized, clearly marking boundary lines and legal agreements that predated the HOA by many years. As my fingers traced those faded lines, I could almost hear the stories of our family's legacy and the legal protections that went with it. I noticed a slight twitch of Karen's eyebrow, just a hint, but it spoke volumes. She realized she was on unstable ground. "These documents prove," I continued, "that the land where the hotel now stands could never have been transferred without my explicit consent." I then presented a series of photographs taken over the years. Each image showcased our continuous efforts, crop rotations, maintenance, and the unwavering presence of my family. They were time-stamped, solidifying our claim. In the back row, a middle-aged woman leaned forward. I recognized Martha Thompson, a longtime resident known for her fairness. Her eyes scanned the documents, and I could see her expression shift as she began to understand the weight of the evidence before us. As I spoke, I could see Karen trying to jump in. "This is hardly," she began, but I firmly said, "I'm not finished." Years of working in legal consulting had taught me the importance of staying calm and measured, even in tense moments. I noticed several board members shifting in their seats, looking uncomfortable. Then came a surprise, a detailed environmental impact assessment I had arranged privately. It highlighted serious issues with the hotel's construction, including drainage problems that could threaten local water supplies and soil disruption that didn't meet county guidelines. Each point was backed by professional geological reports, laying a clear foundation for my claims. Martha raised her hand. "Could you explain the environmental concerns?" I took a deep breath and broke it down for everyone, using straightforward language. My aim was to clarify, not confuse. The room was engaged, they were listening. Karen's expression shifted through various emotions: anger, fear, and desperation. She understood that I wasn't just criticizing the hotel's plans, but revealing a pattern of disregard for community rights. "You can't just take land," I said quietly but firmly. "This isn't just about a hotel. It's about respecting property rights, family legacies, and community trust." A younger board member, Justin, leaned in. "We have some questions about the documentation." I welcomed the questions. They showed the board was paying attention and recognizing the seriousness of my points. For the next hour, I carefully dismantled the HOA's case, using each document, photograph, and legal reference to build a clearer picture. I wasn't merely defending my land, I was standing up for a principle. As the meeting went on, I noticed a change. Board members who had seemed dismissive now appeared concerned. Martha was taking copious notes, and Justin was actively studying the environmental reports, showing genuine interest. Karen, on the other hand, remained silent, her earlier confidence starting to fade. When I wrapped up, the atmosphere in the room was charged with potential. I hadn't won yet, but I had planted crucial seeds of doubt that would lead to serious questions about the HOA's actions. As people began to leave, Martha approached me. "Those environmental reports are serious," she whispered. "I don't think the board fully understood what was at stake." I nodded, gathering my documents. The real challenge was just beginning. Outside, the afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the parking lot. The truck sat quietly, serving as a reminder of the farm that awaited my attention. But now it felt like more than just land. It was about justice. I could see Karen across the parking lot, her gaze filled with a mix of animosity and fear. It was clear she understood that I would not back down, now or ever. Just after breakfast, old Mr. Henderson from the neighboring farm knocked on our door. His hands were rough and slightly unsteady as he slid an old manila envelope across our kitchen counter. "You'll want to see this," he whispered, his voice heavy with the weight of long-held secrets. Inside the envelope, I found a collection of faded photos, autographs, and handwritten notes that revealed a story I had not anticipated. It turned out that Karen Reynolds was not just interested in my farm. She had a history of land grabs that stretched back many years. These documents laid out a pattern: manipulative tactics, backdoor deals, and a systematic approach to securing community land while claiming to improve the neighborhood. As I spread the papers across the table, I felt Sarah's hand on my shoulder, her touch providing much-needed support. "What are you thinking?" she asked, her voice steady. I pointed to the documents. "They're more than just old papers. They show me a map of Karen's entire strategy." Henderson settled into a chair, his expression far away. "She's been doing this for years," he said softly. "Nobody's had the courage to confront her before." One photograph caught my eye, an aerial shot of Willowbrook from what looked like the late 90s. Red lines were carefully drawn on the map to indicate property boundaries, but they didn't align with the official county records I had been studying. Mr. Henderson continued, recalling the time when Karen first assumed the role of HOA president. She promised to make our community better, but better for whom? As Sarah began to copy the documents, I realized how significant each page could be. Potential evidence, each photo a weapon we could use in our defense. A young woman passed by our window, and I recognized her from the HOA meetings. She hesitated, glancing at our house before quickly walking away. "Who was that?" I asked Sarah, but she was already focused on the woman's unusual demeanor. Mr. Henderson leaned in, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "Some folks in the community have been talking. Not everyone supports Karen's plans, but they're scared. She has a way of making life difficult for those who oppose her." As I delved into the documents, each one revealed a story of careful manipulation. There were records of property rezoning, slight boundary adjustments, and unexpected permit approvals. It became clear that Karen had been playing a long game, and my farm was just her latest target. I turned to Sarah and said, "We have to be cautious. These papers hold significant power, but we shouldn't rush into anything. One misstep, and she could undermine us completely." Just then, the phone rung with an unknown number. Sarah answered, her tone steady. The conversation was quick and a bit mysterious. When she hung up, her expression shifted. "Someone wants to meet you," she informed me. "Someone who knows more about Karen's past projects." Mr. Henderson, who was nearby, looked intrigued. "It seems the truth has a way of coming to light," he commented. I started organizing the documents, each one carefully tucked into a clear sleeve. Years of diligent record-keeping were on the verge of paying off. Karen might have thought she could take whatever she wanted, but she didn't yet realize what was in store for her. Outside, a car cruised past our home, and through the window, I recognized a familiar face, the woman from earlier. She was watching, but for what reason? Sarah took my hand. "We're in this together," she reassured me. The documents in front of us were more than just papers. They were undeniable proof, a systematic approach to land theft. They showed that Karen Reynolds believed she was untouchable, but most importantly, they gave us a foundation to fight back. Before Mr. Henderson left, he shared one last piece of advice. "Sometimes," he said, "the quietest people have the loudest stories." As he walked away, a single paper slipped from his jacket, another piece of the puzzle waiting for us to uncover. The following day, I sorted through the collection of papers, old maps, and property records. Together, they formed a complex map of information that would serve as my tool. Marcus Thompson, the lawyer I had hired, sat across from me, his reading glasses balanced on his nose. "These property lines are more complicated than I first thought," he noted, his finger tracing an old survey map. There was enthusiasm and concentration in his voice that filled me with hope. I couldn't help but recall how Karen had often looked down on our family at community meetings. Her snide remarks about our farming methods and land use were hard to forget. Her polished suits and manicured nails stood in stark contrast to my worn work boots and rough hands. But today, I felt ready to challenge that view. Those hands would become tools for justice. Sarah brought us coffee and gave my shoulder a brief squeeze, understanding the gravity of the situation for our family. It wasn't merely about a plot of land. It encompassed our history and our legacy. Marcus spread out a collection of old county records. "Look at this," he said, laying down 3 different maps from various decades. "There's something odd about how the property lines have been recorded over time." I leaned closer as he carefully aligned the maps. Each one shared a different perspective, but together they revealed some surprising details. Small discrepancies began to stand out, tiny adjustments in the property lines that might have slipped past the average eye. "The HOA didn't do their homework," Marcus whispered, a smile forming on his face. "They thought everything was cut and dried, but legal land disputes are rarely that straightforward." We spent hours digging through documents, old property tax records, inheritance papers, and even decades-old correspondence between my grandfather and former county officials. Each piece was like a puzzle fitting together to expose a larger picture. Then, a notification on Marcus's phone caught our attention. He checked it carefully and looked up with excitement. "The local historical society just replied to my inquiry. They have some intriguing documents about land use in this area that date to the 1940s. I couldn't help but think of Karen. She always acted as if she owned everything, her perfectly manicured lawn, her pristine HOA newsletter, and the way she strolled through the neighborhood like royalty. But even kingdoms built on arrogance can crumble beneath their own weight. We need to tread carefully, Marcus advised. If we reveal too much too soon, they might find ways to hide their mistakes. I nodded, aware of the intricate dance we were engaged in. This was not only about winning, it was about uncovering the truth. Sarah then entered the room carrying a box from the attic. "I found these in my grandmother's things," she said, placing it on the table. Inside were more old documents, property surveys, land transfer records, items that most people would have discarded long ago. Marcus's eyes widened as he examined each paper. "These could change the game," he murmured. As the afternoon light began to fade, stretching shadows across our kitchen, I realized that each document could serve as a tool in our fight. Each map represented a potential battleground. Karen believed she could simply take our land, build her hotel, and erase our family's legacy. Little did she know, we were just getting started. The phone rang in the distance, and Marcus glanced at the caller ID. He smiled when he saw it was the county record office. "They found something interesting in the archives," he said. I turned to look out the window at the fields where Karen had tried to take from us, land my family had worked for generations. Those fields now held a secret, a legal defense stronger than any concrete hotel could provide. "They underestimated us," I murmured. "That will be their biggest mistake." As Marcus carefully packed up his briefcase, he placed the documents into a secure folder. "We're not just fighting for land," he said. "We're fighting for justice." The evening settled over the farm, and in the distance, the hotel stood as a stark reminder of Karen's greed. Yet monuments can crumble, and I felt a spark of hope. For the first time in weeks, I sensed that our fight was just beginning. Then the phone rang again, this time from an unknown number. Something about it suggested this call could be significant. My dusty attic, a place filled with memories, felt different today. Sunlight poured through the small round window, illuminating dust particles that danced like tiny storytellers. Sarah was there, carefully lifting an old wooden box I had never seen before. Its edges were worn, and the brass hinges were slightly tarnished. "I found this behind your grandfather's filing cabinet," she said, her voice a blend of excitement and caution. "There's something special about this box." I watched as she slowly opened the lid. Inside were layers of well-preserved documents, a mosaic of our family history. Old property deeds, faded photographs, and decades of correspondence lay before us, a puzzle waiting to be pieced together. My grandfather had always been more than just a farmer. The first document we pulled out was a detailed property map. But this wasn't an ordinary map. Intricate annotations in his precise handwriting filled the margins with notes that hinted at connections beyond our simple farm. "Look at this," I whispered, tracing a red line that zigzagged along the map's edge, connecting our property to several neighboring plots. It revealed a complex legal network. Tiny symbols marked specific locations, almost like a code. Sarah leaned in closer, studying the marks. "These look like surveyor marks, but they're different, more intentional." As we continued to explore, a pattern emerged. My grandfather had meticulously recorded every interaction with the local government, every land survey. Each document added another piece to the intricate story of our land and our family. As we delved into the property transaction, it felt like preparing for an argument that hadn't quite begun. One document stood out to me. A faded letter from 1973 addressed to the county land registry. It bore my grandfather's name, but the contents surprised me. Instead of a standard property deed, it talked about an old land trust, an arrangement so complex that even seasoned lawyers today might have trouble unpacking it. "This isn't just paperwork," I said quietly. "It's a legal shield." Sarah then revealed another document, a hand-drawn family tree that sprawled far beyond our known relatives. Names I didn't recognize were meticulously linked with dates and places, creating a confusing yet fascinating map of land ownership. The most captivating find was a sealed envelope tucked at the bottom of the box. No address, just a deep red wax seal embossed with our family's initials. My hands shook slightly as I broke the seal, being cautious not to tear the fragile paper inside. The letter, written in my grandfather's distinct handwriting, was precise and thoughtful. He spoke of a legal safeguard he had established, a trust that would come into play under certain conditions. Remarkably, those conditions echoed our current struggles with the homeowners association. He knew, I murmured. Somehow, he anticipated something like this. The letter opened a window to more than just legal safeguards. It hinted at a broader narrative involving land rights, community development, and an ongoing dispute that had begun long before the HOA came into the picture. Each sentence was crafted to spark curiosity, revealing just enough to keep me wanting more. Noticing the change in my expression, Sarah asked, "What are you thinking?" I took a moment to gather my thoughts. These documents aren't simply for securing our land. They might uncover something much larger. As I sifted through the papers, a series of photographs slipped out. Aerial views of the land captured over the decades revealed subtle changes, boundary shifts that would likely go unnoticed by those not paying close attention. My grandfather had been keeping a record, leaving behind a trail of evidence that could potentially challenge the HOA's current actions. One image depicted Karen's family property from years ago, and something about the boundaries seemed off, suspicious, though not outright illegal. "We need Marcus to see these," I concluded, carefully collecting the documents. "But we can't let Karen know we've found them. Not yet." Just then, my phone buzzed, adding a bit of urgency to the moment. A text buzzed in from an unknown number, hinting at secrets that were better off hidden. The situation had shifted significantly. The box seemed to carry whispers of long-planned strategies, just waiting for the right moment to emerge. My grandfather wasn't merely a farmer. He was a keen thinker, someone who had foreseen conflicts like this long ago. Sarah squeezed my hand, her expression a blend of concern and resolve. "What's our next move?" she asked. I glanced over the documents spread before me, feeling a sense of calm determination wash over me. We needed to get ready. The following day, Sarah watched me. Her eyes conveyed both worry and determination as I thought about our local newspaper, the Willowbrook Herald, which had been teasing a major story. I felt that today could change everything. For weeks, I had been gathering evidence, piecing together an intricate puzzle. Old maps, historical records, and communication logs had become my tools. Each document revealed how the Homeowners Association, led by Karen Reynolds, had systematically attempted to take our family's land. Then the phone rang. It was Jack Miller from the Willowbrook Herald. "We're ready to run the story," he said, his excitement crackling through the line. "But we need to be cautious. Karen's not going to take this lightly." I nodded, aware of the risks. In a small town like ours, relationships were complicated. People had deep ties, and Karen had been a dominant force for years, often overpowering community meetings and intimidating local business owners to get her way. But that was about to change. Sarah made coffee, her hands steady even as her eyes remained fixed on me. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. It wasn't a question driven by doubt, but by the support she offered. She understood the land's importance to our family. Minutes after the newspaper hit the stands, my phone rang. Karen's sharp voice cut through the line. "You think you can embarrass me?" she spat. "I've been running this community for decades." I kept my tone calm. "I'm not trying to embarrass anyone," I replied. "I'm simply defending what's rightfully ours." Gradually, local coffee shops transformed into hubs for debate. Those who had felt too intimidated to speak began sharing their own stories. Mr. Rodriguez, who owned the corner convenience store, approached me at the gas station. "She tried the same thing with my property 10 years ago," he whispered. "I just didn't have the guts to fight back." By afternoon, the local TV station picked up the story. Young reporter Emily Rodriguez was in the field, ready to share our journey. Outside our farm, a local family stood holding a microphone, challenging the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. They reported what they believed to be illegal land seizure and misuse of authority. Karen, the HOA president, responded predictably by calling an emergency meeting and inviting the local media. It was clear she wanted to shape the narrative and cast me as the troublemaker. But this time, I was ready. Marcus, our lawyer, arrived with a hefty folder of documents. "They will try to discredit you," he warned. "Be prepared for anything." The community center filled up quickly. Faces that once nodded politely to Karen started glancing at her differently. Something was shifting, and she could sense it. This is nothing more than a frivolous attack, Karen announced, her voice rising to fill the room. This family is trying to disrupt our community's progress. But for every claim she made, I had evidence ready to counter her. I had property surveys from as far back as 1946, tax records, and maintenance logs. Each document stood as my defense against her accusations. Sarah squeezed my hand for support, while our teenage daughter Emma live-streamed parts of the meeting on social media. The community was tuning in, and the truth was beginning to emerge. During a break, a local real estate agent approached me quietly. "I've worked with the HOA for years," he confessed. "I always thought something seemed off, but I never had proof." By the evening, our story had spread beyond Willowbrook. Regional news outlets were calling, and property rights groups showed interest. What had begun as a local spat was escalating into something much larger. In a last-ditch effort, Karen delivered a legal notice threatening a countersuit, but it was weak and filled with empty bravado. We recognized it for what it was. As the sunset cast a golden glow over our farm, I reflected on what this struggle meant. It wasn't just about land. It was about standing up to bullies, protecting our family legacy, and proving that one determined person could make a real difference. Then my phone rang once more. This time it was an investigative reporter from a statewide news network. "We want to do a full feature," she said. "Would you be willing to share your story?" I glanced at Sarah, who nodded with a small smile. "Yes," I replied. "We're ready." Little did we know, this was only the beginning of a fight that would change our community for the better. My fingers traced the faded lines of the property map spread across Marcus's conference table. That yellowed paper held more power than we realized. Have you ever noticed how every tiny detail in a document can tell a story? Each crease and notation can hold secrets about land rights that date back further than many of the buildings in our county. As I looked over the papers, Marcus pointed to a section I had missed numerous times. His voice was barely a whisper as he guided my finger to a small symbol, no bigger than the tip of a pencil. This was not just a mark, it was crucial information. It indicated wetlands, a nearly invisible sign that changed everything. The hotel that Karen and the HOA had proudly built was sitting right on a protected ecological zone. No permits could rescue them now. Environmental regulations act like unyielding walls. I recalled the many weekends I'd spent wandering this land with my grandfather. He would highlight subtle changes and the delicate ecosystems that most people overlook, teaching me that these spaces have stories of their own. You just have to pay attention. Now those stories were poised to make a big impact in a courtroom. Marcus laid out a collection of documents in front of me: satellite images, geological surveys, and reports on the water table. Each page represented a tool in our strategy. The HOA might have believed they could bulldoze a family farm, but they had underestimated their opponent. They hadn't done their research. "Expect a fight," Marcus said, meeting my gaze with a mix of determination and personal commitment. He was more than just a lawyer. He was invested in this battle. During our meeting, Sarah called. Her voice was a blend of excitement and caution as she shared news about a local environmental group that wanted to connect with us. They had been keeping an eye on potential wetland violations nearby, presenting us with an unexpected ally. Karen's previous tactics came rushing back to me: aggressive meetings, manipulated paperwork, and bullying methods that had worked until they didn't. She had treated community rules as mere suggestions, assuming her position granted her endless power. But power has its limits, and those limits were about to be tested. The environmental regulations are specific. Wetlands aren't just abstract lines on a map. They are vibrant ecosystems safeguarded by state and federal laws that have no regard for HOA presidents or their lofty hotel dreams. As Marcus detailed the potential violations, each explanation felt like another nail in the HOA's coffin. We were looking at fines that could run into hundreds of thousands of dollars, mandatory restoration costs, and even criminal charges for deliberately ignoring the law. As I pulled out my phone to show Marcus the photos I had taken over the years, we could see the subtle changes in the landscape, changes in water patterns, and shifts in plant life. These images revealed a delicate ecological balance we were determined to protect. I shared that our documentation would strengthen our case against the recent hotel construction. They didn't just build a hotel, I said quietly. They destroyed an ecosystem. In the middle of our meeting, a courier arrived with another set of documents from the county's Geological Survey Department. Each page felt like it added a layer of protection to our legal stance. Marcus quickly called an environmental law expert, and with each confirmation we received, our case became clearer. This hotel was more than just an illegal building. It was an environmental violation that needed to be addressed. Then my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check your email. You'll want to see this." Curious, I opened the email to find aerial photographs detailing the extent of the wetland area. It seemed like someone within the system wanted to lend a hand. These anonymous tips, far from being mere Hollywood fantasies, were often genuine leads. Sarah joined us next, bringing coffee and a collection of signatures from community petitions. Neighbors who had once stayed silent were now speaking up. As Marcus spread the documents across the table, I could see that the Homeowners Association's influence was weakening, one signature at a time. "They thought no one was watching," he said, looking at the growing stack of support, "but everyone was. They just needed someone to connect the dots." I thought about my grandfather and the generations before him, those who valued this land and understood that true ownership means more than just possession. It involves listening and appreciating the delicate balance between our ambitions and the natural world. Where Karen viewed the land as an opportunity, we saw it as a responsibility. Things were coming together, not with dramatic showdowns, but through careful, methodical work. Each document and photograph was like a brick removed from the Homeowners Association's fortress of arrogance. We weren't merely engaging in a legal battle, we were telling a story, one of community, respect, and the understanding that some things matter more than concrete and profits. The moment of truth was no longer a distant future. It was here. As I entered the courtroom that morning, my hands shook with a mix of nerves and determination. Months of preparation had led me to this defining moment, a David versus Goliath struggle that would determine the future of my family's farm. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of tension, filled with local farmers, community members, and curious onlookers. Karen sat a couple of rows ahead, her blazer perfectly pressed, as if it were a shield against the growing evidence that suggested rules didn't apply to her. I noticed her adjusting her designer glasses, a nervous habit she couldn't quite conceal. Next to me, Marcus, my lawyer, leaned in and whispered, "Stay calm, we've got this." His confidence felt like a lifeline in that tense moment. Years of my family's history were at stake. Generations of hard work, sweat, and dreams came down to this single occasion. When Judge Elizabeth Hartman entered, her stern gaze swept over the courtroom. Known for her straightforward approach, she had presided over countless land disputes, yet our case felt different. I could see her studying the extensive documents Marcus had put together, a hint of seriousness in her expression. As the bailiff announced, "The court will now hear closing arguments in the matter of Johnson versus Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association." The room went silent. Marcus stood, looking sharp in his navy suit. "Your Honor," he began, "this is more than just a land dispute. It's about a misuse of power, a deliberate attempt to rob a family of their legacy through bureaucratic tricks." He proceeded to lay out our evidence, property maps from my grandfather's time, preservation documents, and specific clauses from the original community covenant that the HOA had overlooked. Each piece was like a puzzle, revealing a larger story of corruption. Karen's lawyer tried to interrupt, but Judge Hartman silenced him with a stern look. I caught sight of Karen's fingers drumming nervously against her leather portfolio. For the first time, I saw a crack in her usually strong demeanor. "Miss Reynolds," the judge said, addressing Karen directly, "can you explain why your organization moved forward with hotel construction without a complete environmental impact study?" Karen wasted no time. "We followed all standard procedures. The property was," Marcus cut in. "Your Honor, we have evidence that contradicts that." He presented a series of emails exchanged between Karen and local officials, suggesting questionable dealings. Each message illustrated a clear avoidance of proper protocols. I recalled the late night Sarah and I had spent going over these documents, hours filled with research, cross-referencing details, and moments of both frustration and hope. Everything we had worked for hinged on this moment. The legal battle brought forth an unexpected moment when a local environmentalist was called to testify. Her report highlighted significant disruptions to the ecosystem caused by the construction of the Hasty Hotel. She pointed out rare plant species at risk and potential contamination of the water table. Each detail seemed to chip away at the credibility of the Homeowners Association, HOA. I noticed Karen, who had once appeared so composed, starting to show signs of strain. Sweat appeared on her forehead, revealing that her polished exterior wasn't holding up under the pressure. The community members, who had previously feared her power, now observed her with a mix of curiosity and newfound respect for our determination. Then, a pivotal moment unfolded. An HOA board member, obviously uncomfortable, approached the witness stand. His testimony uncovered internal disagreements, suggesting that Karen had acted without full approval from the board. "I couldn't stay silent anymore," he admitted, his voice trembling. "What she did wasn't right." At that point, Marcus, our lawyer, made his strategy clear. This case wasn't merely about winning. It was about revealing a deeper issue of systematic overreach. Hours went by as witnesses offered their insights and documents were scrutinized. The courtroom transformed into a space of revelation, with each piece of evidence peeling back layers of deceit. As time passed, I observed Karen, once self-assured, now showing uncertainty. The woman who believed she could bulldoze through any challenge was facing her toughest test yet. Judge Hartman took her time, carefully reviewing documents, posing pointed questions, and listening intently to the testimonies. Her expression was unreadable, a neutral mask giving away nothing. As we approached the final moments of the trial, the atmosphere in the courtroom became tense, as if everyone was holding their breath. Only one document remained. Marcus walked to the bench, each step measured. "Your Honor," he began, "this final piece of evidence will demonstrate the full extent of the HOA's misconduct." Despite objections from Karen's lawyer, the stakes were clear. It was the moment of truth. As I made my way across the courtroom, my hands trembled not from fear but from the weight of what felt like impending victory. Every step echoed a conversation with my grandfather, whose careful planning had safeguarded our land for generations. Sarah joined me, her eyes scanning the landscape that was slowly healing. The once barren wheat fields were beginning to show signs of new growth, and where the hotel had stood, only the faint outlines of its foundations remained. This was a stark reminder of our battle. Through it all, Marcus had achieved more than just winning a legal case. He had unveiled a web of corrupt local officials who thought they could operate without accountability. Karen's plan to take over family-owned properties was falling apart. 3 city council members had resigned, and the investigations were spreading quickly. No one expected a farmer to stand up to her. As I picked up a handful of soil, it felt different. No longer just dirt, but a symbol of our strength. Our community had changed. Neighbors who once feared the Homeowners Association now stood together, sharing their own stories of struggle. Local news highlighted our fight, encouraging others to stand against unfair land grabs. It wasn't just about winning, it was about protecting our heritage. My grandfather's meticulous property records, neatly kept in old leather-bound journals, had become our secret weapon. Every carefully noted boundary and each handwritten observation on land use held more weight than any modern legal document. But Karen wasn't done. The look she gave in the courtroom made it clear this was just the start. She appealed, hinting at hidden connections that could potentially bring our case back into play. However, we were ready. For every move she made, we had a counter-strategy. The farm had grown beyond a piece of land. It was now a statement. It demonstrated that small landowners could resist powerful entities and that thorough documentation, combined with community support, could tackle corruption. As the sun set, painting the sky in warm hues, Sarah squeezed my hand and whispered, "We did it." Yet we both understood the real work was just beginning. In the distance, a hawk circled our land, a silent guardian overseeing our hard-fought victory.